let's talk a bit about Couchbase then. I mean, as a company, this isn't that interesting, so I'll skip over this quickly. But there's lots of big names using us or our software, and those are both customers and some of them not customers. Actually, all of those are customers. But yes, so there's lots of people who are using it who aren't paying us any money. And then, like all open source companies, pretty much we're kind of selling licensing, which basically means support and services around it. So lots of big names, all exciting stuff. So if you go onto Tesco and look at one of their product catalogs, that's probably running off Couchbase. You download the Ryanair mobile app and update your flight details using Couchbase Mobile. So it's all, it's all these very big kind of big scale, mostly document shapes, so things like user sessions, user profiles, product documents, that kind of thing. But the interesting thing about Couchbase Server is it's not just document database, it's also a key value store, so you can bung pretty much anything you like in there. But I'm not talking about Couchbase Server today so much. I'm really talking about Couchbase Mobile. So most people developing for mobile apps are using SQLite as the storage layer. In fact, that's pretty much the default option. If you're a Windows Phone developer, for example, even there you go into Visual Studio, you create your Windows Phone application, you choose a storage layer, and it's SQLite by default. So seems pretty pervasive. So why use something else? Well, obviously there's the problem that a lot of us are familiar with of kind of impedance mismatch between the objects that we're creating in our code and then trying to store it into a relational model. That's fine. You can just bung JSON documents or whatever representations you want to use into the body, or I guess of a well, not the body, but the one of the cells of a SQLite database, if that's really what you wanted to do. So there are other issues though around mobile development, specifically the fact that the devices you're dealing with are not necessarily always connected to the internet. So you can't predict whether when you're syncing or receiving data that it's going to happen successfully or at all. So here's our fancy animation from the marketing department. So you have a device which is plugged into the cloud, and that's okay when you've got your good set of bars. But you go on some kind of underground railway, or you go up into the Peak District or wherever, and you end up slightly poor performance in terms of mobile signal, and things start spinning, and eventually you have no internet access at all, and you can't get your app working. So obviously a lot of people have taken, to some extent, the easy route out, I guess you could say, of either having an offline-only app or an online-only app. And a lot of things I use when I'm going around from train stations and stuff like that are online-only, but seem not to need to be. So things like the, I think the National Rail app, when you're looking at train times and stuff like that, it could quite easily cache the days or the next week's train times, I would have thought. But no, you have to be online all the time. Okay, so I guess one of the problems of having poor connectivity is that it leads to poor performance of your app. It could just be that it doesn't work at all, or it could be slow and kind of a crappy experience. And something that we've found is that there's a company called USAMP did a survey of people using mobile apps and why did they uninstall them. And the top 3 answers could all relate back to not having a decent fallback for when there isn't a connection there. So things like the freezing, crashing, and slow to respond apps tend to be why people uninstall. Okay, so what's the cause of that? Well, we say it's data location. If you're storing data only in the cloud or wherever, then the issue is one of well, you kind of, that's okay in a perfect world. Google often talk about a fully pervasive internet, but that's not necessarily where we are right now, particularly not where I live. So you end up with a situation where you put in your data in a place that's fine when everything's working well, but it's not so great when people are actually living a normal real world life. So when some of the engineers at Couchbase kind of decided to work on Couchbase Mobile, as they called it, or Couchbase Mobile as it is called, they were interested in having a document database that ran natively on iOS, Android, and other platforms. But the really interesting thing seemed to be solving sync. Now, a lot of the people that I speak to who are building mobile applications say that writing synchronization functions is one of the perhaps the most boring and hardest parts of writing a mobile app. So as nice as it is to have a native kind of JSON document database that runs on the device, the real thing that people seem to choose Couchbase Mobile for is syncing. It handles the syncing for you. So you can save something to the database or retrieve from the database, and at the moment that you're dealing with that data, you don't have to worry about whether you have a connection or not, because Couchbase Mobile handles that synchronization for you. So you can set the document and kind of forget about it, and then Couchbase Mobile will, I guess, work out when there's a connection there and push it back up to your data center. So the things that we kind of aim for are that you have that you build your application to work offline first, so that your train times are always there, even if they might be slightly out of date, maybe by a few minutes, depending on when you were last online. But it will always work whether there's a connection there or not. And then when you get the connection, it will handle the synchronization for you. So what is Couchbase Mobile? It's made up of 4 different parts. Couchbase Lite is the embedded database, and Sync Gateway is the part that handles the synchronization, as you might guess. So, like I said, Couchbase Lite is basically works very much like CouchDB. We have native versions for iOS, Android, and then because Android is basically Java, then it runs anywhere the JVM runs with a few tweaks that we made. So we have people run it on Raspberry Pis and things like that. And then if you're a .NET developer, we have a Xamarin version as well. The Xamarin version doesn't work on Windows Phone yet, which you might find surprising, but it will do on Windows Phone 10. Okay, so this is basically your main interface in your application. You save out your documents, read them in. Just as with CouchDB, you write MapReduce queries, normally just maps to index what's inside the documents, and it's basically, because it's a native library, it's quick, and it handles the integration with Couchbase Sync Gateway. Okay, so yeah, I mean it's basically very similar to working with any document database, except in the case of Couchbase Mobile, because it's designed for a scenario where you have multiple devices which are updating the same documents at once. Versioning is kind of built into the way you interact with it. So if you're writing a document into the database, you have to provide the version UUID of the last good version that you saw. And then if the database happens to have a different version, you'll have to resolve the conflict. It'll come back and it'll give you basically a tree of the divergent versions that have happened since you last saw it. And that's great. That's fine if you're connected. Obviously, that's something that's fairly straightforward. If you're not connected, then and you're diverging and diverging, then you will end up with siblings, I guess. And Sync Gateway itself will then handle kind of sibling resolution based on at the moment, I suppose the most sophisticated kind of way that you can, when you have potentially thousands or maybe even millions of devices writing to the same document, which is I hate to say it, but pretty much at random. But it's not quite that. But if all things are equal, then it would be almost pretty much at random. It's schemaless because it's a JSON document database, and that's just part of the deal. And yeah, our very excited American colleagues like to say, you code fast and you run fast. So basically, it's about iterating very quickly. You don't have to worry about too much detail of how the database works. You just shove your stuff in and pull it out again. And here's some C# code that shows you basically, and I'll go some more into the code of our to-do example, because everyone has a to-do list example now. But basically, you set up a manager, which is your connection to the database library, and then you create a database itself, or a connection to a database in that manager. Now, most apps will just have one database, but it's worth saying that because you compile or you build Couchbase Lite into the application, and it's delivered as part of the APK or whatever it is, then you could potentially have multiple Couchbase Lites running on the same device if you have multiple applications using it, but they're all walled off from each other. And then, I mean, there's kind of no surprises here really. You want to get a document, then you get a document. You want to, yeah. So basically, you loading in a document in is by key name and so on. It's no surprises. Yeah, I guess it's JSON. Sorry, that's kind of a bit of a waste of a slide. Okay, so MapReduce indexes. I don't know how many of you have seen the cartoon where there's two guys sitting next to each other, and one says, how do I query your new NoSQL database? And the other one says, well, you write a MapReduce job in Erlang. And the other guy says, Bob, did you just tell me to go fuck myself? But MapReduce isn't that bad. The good thing about this is you're not writing it in Erlang for a start, which you might like Erlang, but if you're developing on iOS, then you're probably more familiar with Objective-C. So you're working in your own native language, well, the language of the environment. So whether that's Swift or Java or C# or Objective-C, then at least that's one less hurdle to go. And really, creating MapReduce, or like I said, mostly map queries, isn't too much harder than some fairly involved SQL, really. So yeah, basically everything's based around MapReduces. Your documents are keyed on a main key, but then you will query them based on the contents. So if you have a user profile and you want to find all the people from Manchester, you can obviously do a map job to emit all the people keyed on the city that they're in. Again, nothing new really. So there you go. Okay, so the other thing that's interesting about Couchbase Mobile, or Couchbase Lite in particular, is that it's built around very much kind of reactive ideas. So you hook up your UI to change notifications, queries, live queries within the database. So say you have a query running on, let's say when train times are updated for a particular station, and that's something that someone's particularly interested in, then that will be pushed from the database to your application layer, and then you can deal with however you want to present that in the UI. Yeah, so you set up observables in Java and so on. There you go. Okay, so sync, like I say, is the big thing. So because you naturally have potentially millions of devices that are running your application, it's very much like something like if you're familiar with the Dynamo paper, every device in the setup is a master. So they can all push in, they can all pull out again, and so you will come up with conflicts naturally. There is a way of dealing with them. You can set up. You've got quite a lot of flexibility over how you set up sync. So you can have it going all the time in both directions, or you can have it only going one way, or you can set it up so that it will only be triggered on certain updates of certain fields or documents in the database. Yeah. And the other thing that it handles is, so with Couchbase itself, it gives you basically a login layer. So by default, you can do user authentication with Facebook or sorry, what's the sorry. Or you can set up your own authentication clearly. And then what you can do is you assign users different roles, and you assign different users to different channels. So by channels, basically what I mean is you can tag documents with a different set of names, so that instead of synchronizing an entire multi-terabyte database to a small iPhone, you're only sending the relevant data to that device and backwards. So here's an example of setting up your sync from the Couchbase Lite side, from the device side. So you can see that basically, you have a choice over how whether it's continuous, you can do that, or you can set it up to happen on intervals and so on. So it's fairly flexible how you do the synchronization. But once you've done this, that's about pretty much all you have to do on the device side. And I'll show you as well what you do on the sync gateway side shortly. So yeah, you can get it in all the usual places, as you'd expect. Okay, so I'll show you quickly to do Lite. Okay, so I've got 2 emulators running. And I'm going to create a new list. Is it showing up again? Yeah. So I'll create a new list to share with a friend for shopping. So I've created this new list on one device. Then over here, because I'm logged in as the same person on both, it's fairly simple. But I could this is where I forget how to scroll in an Android emulator. Hang on. Or might be that I've just crashed the emulator. Sorry. Okay. So I'll start that again. Apologies. Okay, so while that's booting up, because it takes a while for the emulator to get going, I'll just show you what the sync function looks like. Oh, that's me on the screen. That's a bit weird. Okay, so you write the sync function on the server side in JavaScript, because common denominator language, and what you're doing is you're basically handling authorization of who can synchronize or write to and read from which documents in the whole database, and also, like I say, who should get what stuff. So pretty much, here we're kind of we're making sure that each person who can write to and delete documents has a role of editor. And I mentioned roles before. You can set up roles and then assign users to roles. Roles have no meaning outside of what you define in the sync function. And you can you're making sure that each document, it has certain properties in the JSON document before you allow it to sync. And really, that's pretty much it. It's about making sure that the stuff that comes through from the devices is sane and matches your authorization profile. Okay, so this is up and running. So this was working about 40 minutes ago. I was synchronizing tasks between this and between the two emulators, and also between my phone. Okay, so that's somewhat frustrating. But what would have happened is that when you type in a new task here, so buy some shoes, that would then show up within a very short space of time on the other device. And you can attach photos to it and so on. And that's just a random GIF because it's an emulator. But yeah, I can attach a photo and that would get synced over as well. And that really is disappointing because that was working really well earlier. But not to worry. So yeah, for some reason that's come to life. Excellent. Right, so if I all right, so I've got something like a response out of the emulator. Well, that's embarrassing, but okay, I'm sorry, I won't waste any more of your time with that. So, yeah, so the basic idea is that you, when it's working, you fire and forget pretty much. Yeah, that's something different. Okay, so back to the slides. Okay, so yeah, this is a very nice animation now, which just goes through what I showed you a moment ago. So the sync function itself, like I say, handles basically users, roles, and access, and channels, and who gets access to those channels. So the sort of example that we normally come up with is if you're writing a news website, then, or an instant messaging client is probably a better one. Then each conversation in that instant messaging software would be a channel, and then you subscribe everyone to that channel. And then every time one of those people posts to it, everyone else automatically gets it pushed out. So as the demo kind of failed, that leaves me somewhat short. But any questions?
How well does it interface with the native data layer kind of stuff? So I know that there's like content providers and things like that on Android. Can you just swap out as a data provider, or does it have its own kind of API that you have to play with to get it working nicely? Do you know? Or? It
has its own API, yeah. Okay. So you can. There's some more integration with on the iOS side, but
right.
Certainly with Android, yeah, it's pretty much just yeah. It's very much like working with CouchDB, like I say, it's kind of
sure.
Yeah.
Can you bake in any rules, or can you find any rules about handling the conflicts when you've got two more devices trying to update the same record?
You can, but the reason why is because you basically handle it in the application layer. So Couchbase will give you the tree. It'll tell you that there's conflict. It'll tell you where the version has occurred, and say these are the versions that are conflicting, and what do you want to do with them? Which is a fairly typical kind of NoSQL strategy, it seems, until you get into things like CRDTs and other conflict resolution that's kind of baked in. But yeah. Any others? No? Okay, well, thanks. I'll show you So if you do want to find out more, the docs are online, clearly, and we have a number of blogs that kind of go into working with it. So primarily, there's mostly about iOS and Android, but we've got a new .NET developer from Microsoft who's on the developer advocacy team now, and he's writing a lot more blogs about working with Xamarin. And as soon as Windows 10 is out, it'll be native kind of Windows development as well. And then the forums are quite friendly and quite helpful, forums.couchbase.com. And that's about it, really. So thanks for your time.